Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma. I'm Kisma, and today's episode is How to Have More Confidence, Part 1. Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set.
Well, hello there, Nick.
Hello there, Kisma.
How has your week been?
It's we're recording this on Labor Day.
We are recording this on Labor Day.
It's super quiet here at the office.
At the office at Common Grounds in Carlsbad, California. Just, podcasting away.
I've been looking forward to this all week, actually. But we had a great weekend. We were up in Orange County and spending a few days with some really phenomenal business owners and amazing human beings.
Totally. Yeah, it was great. It's so, it reminds me, a small group of people doing some really great work on our businesses. And it reminds me how important it is to choose who we hang out with, who all of us, like listeners included, like who do we spend time with? Yeah. Which is very timely for the topic today.
It is very timely for the topic today. And my own biggest takeaway, and it ties directly into this, is, sometimes those events kind of stress me out. Like I get into some of the stories that we're going to talk about today about like, maybe I should be somewhere else, or maybe this, maybe I should be doing more, or maybe I'm doing it wrong, or this kind of stuff. Like, and being around people like that, there's some of these elements that happen there. And this group that was just suddenly devoid of any of that. It was the quality of the people, the quality of the conversation that we were having, and the really great intentions of each and every person there. It just spoke to the level of their own development and everything like that. And all of that was just magically gone for me. I had an amazing time. I got some amazing insights, and I just learned so much and made such great connections.
Yeah. And this is part of, how to have more confidence. When we look at least my definition of confidence, is that really strong presence internally, self-awareness, just knowing like you're here doing what you're here to do. And when you're around people with this confidence, they're also very kind and they're of service.
Yeah.
So they're, one of the things to know, like when someone doesn't have confidence, or if your confidence is lacking, if you're trying to take something from someone, or you feel like you don't have enough or someone else has more, it's a sure sign that the confidence has gotten chipped away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I'd love to hear from you as a flute player. Like, I know that the way that you stepped into that role, like you just dropped right into it. Like, what did that feel like for you? Like, what was that experience like? Did it feel really confident in the moment? Was there any of that element? Like, what?
Well, no. I mean, when I started, I didn't know what I was doing, like anything, confidence with something like music and performance, anything like confidence can and does come from experience and practice. And the key, though, is to, I feel like, have that right intention behind it, which for someone like a musician is to, I'm going to do the best absolute job performance I can. And I am going to practice and do it until I get there. And it's taking out all the other stories and fears, like we'll get to in a moment. And it's like anything, if the intention is really strong behind what we're here to do and how we're here to serve, we stay in our own lane, and that I feel like it fuels the experience, it fuels the skills, and it's like rinse and repeat and practice and elevate and continue to master whatever it is we do and to master ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And it's really tricky to be confident as a musician, or I would assume as an athlete or somebody performing a particular skill, if you haven't worked at it, if you haven't practiced, if you're not in great shape.
Yeah.
But today, and this is a perfect segue, we're really talking about that confidence as a human.
Mm-hmm.
And so the confidence is a general confidence as if of a human will fuel those other specific roles in life.
Right. That you step into. And it is like a performance in a certain way. You're being yourself, but you're performing certain acts, you're performing certain roles, and stepping into that just really fully you. And like, I got this, I can only imagine, like, for a new parent, like how scary that must be. Like, to feel like, well, I don't know this is a human being. Like, I don't know what to do with this. And stepping into that and just being yourself and doing it in a really beautiful way.
Being yourself, having that intention. Like you said, I'm going to do the best possible job I can do. Like, to the best of my ability, I'm going to parent. To the best of my ability, I'm going to learn an instrument, start to work out, work on my business, show up at my job. It's like that whole confidence piece starts from, I feel like, the human essence. And then we take that and we deliver it to the different things that we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the exciting part about this. So we want to break it down first and foremost in the three main areas that will really trip people up when it comes to, like, external sources. Like, what are the things outside of us that can really, put that chink in the armor without even realizing it? And the first one of those is stories. It's the stories that we hear around us, and even the stories that we watch.
Right.
On TV or in movies and things like that.
For sure. And, I want to preface this and say it always comes back to the internal work.
Absolutely.
However, as you'll hear for our listeners, understanding how to increase confidence and have more really does start with a lot of awareness and presence. So I have a great example story. When I opened my yoga studio, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was fresh out of being a musician, and the economy was going down, and people told me all the time, "You're crazy." And they also called it, like, this particular part of town, it's never going to work. I heard it again, it's never going to work over there. And I was like, of course it's going to work. Like, I don't know. I was just so dropped in that I am doing this. I said, of course it's going to work. Absolutely, it's going to work. And it did. It worked. It was a great, beautiful studio with amazing people. And I would also I remember one employee would come in and start to talk and lack. It's like, oh, well, this is, and I was like, never do that here again, ever. Like, there are moments where we have to decide, I'm not taking on other people's fears and stories. And that's on us.
Yeah.
Yet it happens after we're aware that people around us are saying things, doing things, repeating these stories and beliefs of theirs. We have to have a pulse on it so that we can actually say, nope, not taking it on.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it was really interesting is how many reasons that they had that would not work.
Many.
There were so many reasons: the economy, the location, the people around there. It was all these different things that were like, no way, like this. And trying to enroll you into that, it's really fascinating that their first go-to wasn't, let's make this awesome. It was like, they're trying to protect you.
Yeah. Well, the lesson I learned, and what I certainly teach my students and clients, is I talked a lot about how excited I was. I probably talked too much. So we share our excitement and our ideas, expecting everyone else to be as excited as we are. Yet, oftentimes, it can be family, it can be friends, it can just, usually family and friends are trying to protect us. So they'll come in right away with all the reasons it won't work. Other people, they'll draw into their own lack of confidence, their own insecurities, and start to project that on us. Because they're like, well, if I couldn't do it, how can they? And that's where we have to be so clear and defined in our purpose and why we're doing what we're here to do, whether it's a project or a life purpose, and just be like, if you're doing it, own it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't own other people's stories.
Yeah. There's stories around it that they've built up, from their own experiences. These will show up a lot of times in families, particularly. It'll also show up just all around you, and friends, well-meaning friends. And coworkers even who just that's their stuff, right? And staying out of that. And one of the aspects of that's so big that we've been talking about a little bit, but I want to dive into deeper, is their doubts.
Yeah. So
they built the story around it, but in there somewhere is all of their doubts are wound up in it.
Exactly. And so when they're doubting, and if we take on their doubt, and again, the big piece here, everyone, is I don't want anyone to be making other people wrong. Like, oh, my father-in-law is such a negative Nelly. I knew it was his fault. No, no, no. This is not about blaming anybody else. It's just about awareness, because ultimately it's on us. It really is. And
it's true.
It's absolutely true. And people have a right to have their doubts. Like if they're going to doubt, okay, they're going to doubt. The thing is, do we want to take that on? And those stories and those doubts will become ours. You know, another story, this is all bringing up interesting stuff. I think I've shared this story before, but when I was starting out as a flutist, like 13 years old, 13, 14, I started out and I was really good fast. And so I would go to these summer band camps, music camps, flute clinics. And as a seventh grader, so it must have been like 13, as a seventh grader, I would try out for like the ninth grade band. And I remember one band camp, I got first chair. It was like, it wasn't local. It was and it flipped out. Everyone's like, who's a seventh grader coming in getting first chair? So all the ninth graders like hated me. And then of course, like there was a teacher there. I'll never forget. I can see her to this day. And her students were the ones that I beat out. And I was having a lesson with her. And I remember, you know, I just like, I was just wanting, I didn't have the confidence yet that I could have had. And I wanted some reassurance, like, well, what do you think? I really want to do this as a career. I just love playing. You know, I was looking for her as a young person. Often we do. I'll never forget. She said, well, you know, if you were going to be a Jean-Pierre Rampal, we would already know it by now.
Oh,
and so
man.
Jean-Pierre Rampal, for those who don't know, was like a famous flutist. And, you know, we all like, oh, Jean-Pierre. And I was not a Jean-Pierre Rampal. However, guess what? Every time for the longest period, at least through high school and part of college, before I went on stage to play, guess whose voice I would hear?
That
Hers.
Same voice.
Well, if you were Jean-Pierre Rampal, we'd know it already, because I didn't have the skills now. Be like, oh, I'm not taking that on. Especially, and this is something parents you can really do for your children. Like teach them to, if they've got a passion and they want to stick to something, own it. Don't take on other people's doubts. And it's different from feedback and criticism and teaching, right? So criticism is the wrong word, but feedback. So if you're working with a coach or a teacher in something and they're telling you ways to be better, take it, do it.
Yeah.
But when someone puts a doubt on you like that, man, I was like, wow, that's really fascinating. That stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. Those kind of doubts, they sound a lot different than, hey, have you thought about this?
Exactly.
You know, hey, are you looking
if you do
at
it this
from
way,
this
it's going to be easier. It's going to be cleaner. You're going to,
Yeah. Or what do you think about this? You know, I mean, that's a creative conversation that's about, okay, like, I want you to be successful. And here are some of the things that, you know, from an objective perspective, you might not be seeing.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. So doubts of other people, and then our own doubts, which come from all of this that we're talking about in this episode and part 2 next week. You know, all it takes is a bit to start triggering our own doubts. And it's probably impossible to have doubt and confidence in the same thought flow.
Yeah. And what it does is one layers on top of the other and top of the other. So energetically, what's happening in your head is a whole layer of just fog that's going to cloud your judgment, that will disconnect you from what's really, you know, true for you and being really dropped in. And it'll make you feel really ungrounded. So kind of spinny, like, oh, well, this person said that. I mean, I know, like, I struggled with, you know, performance on stage and stage fright and things like that. And that's exactly what that felt like. When I was on stage and I was having a difficult time, everything would start to spin.
Yeah.
And I now I know in retrospect, I was getting really, really ungrounded.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I'm 100 measures in, you know, because as a trumpet player, we count a ton of rests. I'm like 100 measures in. I'm like, wait, what?
How many more do I have?
How many more? And then, but it's a really fast, like now that I unpack some of those experiences being so ungrounded, then it's like all the music starts to sound different. And I'm like, do I come in here? Do I come in? It's like, I know the piece, but it's hard to, it's really hard to drop in.
And we lack trust of self, right? Extreme doubt of self.
That's it.
Because when we're calm and clear, it's like, oh yeah, I got this right in. But it's when we're in the spin, when we allow the spin to happen, and all of a sudden, and this can happen in any way, shape, or form throughout our days, we don't trust, or whether we call it intuition or just our own knowing, we don't trust it.
Right. And it is a very scary place to be.
Mm-hmm.
As a trumpet player, it was like, oh, I'm going to be the guy who comes busting in, 5 measures early. And,
right.
But I have a client who has to work with technical stuff, and technical stuff for whatever reason gets her really ungrounded. And so then she gets stuck in those doubts, like, oh, am I going to do it right? Is it going to be this? And all that kind of stuff starts floating around in her head. And the very first thing that gets happen, she gets really ungrounded and she gets out of it. And it makes her day just grind by because she's not confident. When she's in that space, I should say, she's not confident. Next step.
Right.
She loses that sense of confidence.
Being present is such a fixer for everything. Just be
it really is.
Right here, right now, present and aware. Like, what's going on? Why am I spinning? Why am I losing confidence? Whose stories did I take on? What are the doubts coming up? Why are they coming up? Why am I freaking holding on to them? Like, sometimes it's that awareness comes by pausing and asking questions of self.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Just taking a breath and asking a good question.
So we talked about stories. We talked about doubts. I know there was a third thing we wanted to cover today. What is that?
The third thing ties right into that is comparison. And this is the biggest one.
Yeah.
This is really one that traps people. People look at it a lot of times as like a positive thing because they think it's like, oh, this is what's going to make me better.
Right.
Like I'm analyzing somebody else, or I'm really comparing. But really quickly, like it very rarely works out that way because it's not done, it's not really approached with the right mindset. And really, really quickly, it just spins people out.
Yeah.
So it's comparing, getting stuff. That's one of the things that those business things that I get into sometimes, because these are guys with like big time businesses and, lots of stuff, like they've been at it for a really long time. And when I sit in a room like that, it's really easy to get sucked into comparison.
Right.
But if they don't have that going on within them,
exactly,
it's like it allowed me to stay out of it. And then it was a very different experience for me, which was really fun.
And so that's part of the key is like ownership of where we compare ourselves to others, and then ownership of where we're just allowing someone else to hijack our dreams and our opinions, etc. But there's a couple things that I see that happen when we start to compare ourselves to others. We're taking from them and we're taking from ourselves.
Ooh.
So there's no give here.
Right.
Because it's like, if I'm sitting across from Nick recording the podcast, I'm like, oh man, he seems more clear today. He's doing this. Like if I started to go there, it's like I just grabbed a handful of my energy and threw it at you. And then because we're comparing, there's a part of that nuance that like wants to make someone wrong in a way. It's like, well, how can they do this? Why are they doing that? They're so much better. And so we're taking from them too.
Yeah.
It's just a big energetic drain.
It is.
Because the other way to go about it is to understand, like, have that sense of, it's praise. Really, it's like, whoa, look at that. I always say this to my clients too that have their businesses. Look at that person. They're doing great. That's amazing. Good for them. If you don't have to get entangled, you don't have to start marketing like them. You don't have to talk like them, but honor them, because if they can do it through the law of demand and supply, there's an unlimited supply. So can you.
That's right. Yeah.
So
it's so easy to forget that.
It's so easy to forget it because it's like we are kind of chipping away at ourselves. Like I should, the should, which is just creating shame.
Yeah. I mean, comparison's so easy to get sucked into. It's something that we're external in so many ways. Like we're moving out into the world, we're interacting with the world, and we really don't see ourselves as clearly as we would think.
Right.
It was really fascinating. I was reading this book about, of all things, understanding comics. And it talked about, what I thought was so interesting about it is like when you look at a comic, it oftentimes lacks all of these kind of details. And the reason, it's not an accident. The reason that it does that is because we actually, when we look at ourselves, we don't always fill in those blanks. But what we do is when we see that blank image is we take and we fill ourselves into it. So it's easier for you to step into the story. And it happens because we don't see ourselves. There's so many bits and pieces of ourselves that we don't see from the inside out. And that happens in comparison. So we look at somebody else, Facebook or Instagram is it's so ripe for a study of comparison and FOMO because it's everybody presenting their highlight reel. By and large, not everybody does that all the time, but by and large, what you're seeing is the person's highlight reel. And it's very easy to look at the parts that we see about ourselves, which oftentimes we are focused on the negative aspects of ourselves. That is a natural human tendency to see what's not necessarily to see what's not working, but to be aware of a negative or a vulnerability because it's a safety thing. And then we look, and then that's the piece that we see. So then we look into that and we see that, oh, that's a weakness. Now I have to be better. And it becomes this endless chase to be different, to match up with the the highlight reel of somebody else. It's kind of it's definitely not a flaw in the human design. It's what we're doing within the world and what we're not doing inside of our heads that's causing that to happen.
And I think it's taught very early on too. When you go back to days in school, like, well, Sally, why don't you sit like Bobby? Or look how good Jill's being. Why can't you be like her? Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like your sister? Why can't you be like something other than self? And so it sets up a sort of a negative draw of energy through comparison. Which is really depleting and we talk a lot about prosperity, will diminish prosperity simply because of that universal law of, supply and demand and the law of increase. When we're putting energy on something that we don't have, it grows.
Energetically, that's exactly what you're simply giving that person and that aspect your energy, like literally your raw energy. You're just giving it away.
So the pivots, I wanted to switch back to you around, you had mentioned the ungroundedness. And when we get ungrounded, it's easier to take on doubts. It's easier to take on stories, and it's way easier to compare.
Your defenses are down.
What's a quick hack to get grounded?
One of the quickest hacks to get grounded is what you want to do when we talk about getting grounded is basically getting back in your body, getting your brain and your body actually like talking again, right? Because otherwise you're just all stuck up in your head and you're disconnected. So one of the best things that you can do is to put the tip of the tongue at the roof of the mouth and take some deep breaths.
Through the nose,
in and out through the nose. The pattern would be in for 6, hold for 3, out for 6, hold for 3.
And we bring the tip of the tongue to the roof of the mouth to contain our energy, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it. That it actually, it allows what is happening, those energetic circuits to be closed so that everything can move more efficiently. And it reconnects the up and the higher and the lower. So as above, so below.
Got it. So everyone can think about tip of the tongue, roof of the mouth, inhale through the nose for 6 counts. When you get to the top, you hold it for 3. And then through the nose, exhale for 6 counts, hold the bottom, exhale for 3, and repeat as long as you need to. It really does work quickly. What's something else to do in terms of not getting caught in the comparison? Well, we mentioned it. It really is to shift into praise, whatever it takes. And it's just, it could be like a quick thought of like, wow, that's so cool. Good for them. Next, get out of it, right? Extract yourself out of that internal conversation that you're having and just pivot it into that's so cool. They could do it. It's one of the best shifters because you're giving a positive energy to someone. And as we know, what we give out, we're going to get back.
And you're using it, I think you're using that in a really positive way. Like you can't ignore the fact that somebody's having a success that you want. Right. But you can use that in a positive way. Just like you said, if they can do it, I can do it.
Right.
Let me find my way there.
Right.
And then you take your next step and you're back in you. Right. That's going to feel way more confident than constantly looking outward and having that drain your energy.
Absolutely. And as we said at the beginning, ultimately it all does come back to us. We're just looking to create that awareness of where in the world it can be so tricky and we can step out of our own confidence and give it away so quickly by either taking on people's stories, doubts, or comparisons.
Right. Now, you had a really interesting one here as far as, an action step or something to really be aware of. And it had to do with assumptions and making assumptions. And I think this is a beautiful one for taking that step back. So let's say that you've taken your deep breath and it's like, okay, I took my deep breaths. I'm feeling kind of better. Like, now what? And when you talk about can you talk a little bit about the assumptions?
Assumptions are, sort of like the 4 agreements. Don't make any assumptions or don't assume anything. However he puts it, it's a great thing to live by. The stories. So say a story enters our head, and all of a sudden we assume it's true.
Right.
And when we assume something is true, it's like it gets locked in us so deep, and we have to work even harder to get it out. So, there's that famous Chinese sage that would just say, "Oh, is that so?" I think Byron Katie uses that too, but it actually comes from an ancient Chinese sage. It's like, "Is that so?" Just ask, like, "Is that 100% true? Is that really true? Or am I assuming something? Am I taking something personally?" And so when we ask ourselves, "Is that true? Is that really the truth?" Then we get a clear answer.
Right. And I think especially in one-to-one interactions, it's really easy to assume, like, we see somebody make a face or they have a particular like posture about
body
them or
language,
something that triggers us, and we'll think like, oh, they must be thinking this. They must be thinking I'm an idiot, or or I don't know what I'm talking, or like whatever that story is that starts to creep in. That's where the assumption gets made, just based on one little piece of information that they're thinking a certain way.
Right.
And that's where, and then it opens up the door for that to keep going. So when you don't do that, right, when you just take that out of it, that's totally like a Bob Newhart, just stop it. Sort of situation of just try to remove that as much as you're able, and then you can just be yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
And the removal really is like, oh, is that truth? Is that 100% true?
Yeah.
Do I know that to be a fact? And as soon as we don't know it to be a fact, we can be like, then I'm not going to take it on as a fact.
Right.
Again, back to the awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we sign off, and just a reminder, make sure you tune in next week, because it will be part 2 of this How to Have More Confidence series. And it's an important episode to listen to. But we wanted to start adding into each episode an illuminated thought. Something that if you had any takeaway, you could be like, I'll write this illuminated thought down. This is the thing I can focus on from this episode. So Nick, what is our illuminated thought for today's episode?
A beautiful quote by Theodore Roosevelt: "Comparison is the thief of joy." Now, when I think about that and I think about joy, like joy is such in my mind anyway, joy is such a beautiful and like ultimate confident state. When you're in a truly joyful state, then there's not a care in the world. Like you're just enjoying, and you're totally present in the moment, and you're lit up, and you have tons of energy, and it's just joyful. And as soon as you start to compare that in big ways or in little ways, it takes a little piece and it takes a little piece, like little by little, it's the thief that takes all those little pieces without you even realizing it, until you're like in a space where, well, what happened?
Yeah, there's a big hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So comparison is the thief of joy. Thanks so much for tuning in today, everyone. And hey, if there's someone that you know that you believe would benefit from having more confidence, please share this episode, Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, episode 166. And if you're on iTunes, we would so appreciate it if you'd hop over and give us a review and a rate.
Namaste.
Peace. Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.